Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for session 6 of our 10-part series on the top 10 scams in Delaware. During this session, we will be discussing good and bad practices related to debt collection and some important information for consumers to be aware of. Joining me today to discuss debt collection are two of our members of our consumer protection team. Deputy Attorney Katie Devanney, who joined the consumer protection team in September after coming from the Investor Protection Unit, Special Investigator Joe Rago, who joined the Consumer Protection Unit almost 4 years ago after a 24-year career as a police officer. If you would like to ask questions for our presenters during the discussion, please put them in the chat box, and if there is time at the end, we will answer a few. As a quick disclaimer, this presentation is being offered for general information purposes only. Any opinions expressed are solely those of our presenters and do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Attorney General or the Delaware Department of Justice. We encourage anyone with questions or concerns regarding their particular situation to consult an attorney. Now let's jump into the discussion. Katie, if someone is receiving calls from a debt collector, how can they determine if this is a legitimate collector or a bad actor?
Well, one of the first things that I would look for is to see whether or not they send what's called a validation notice. So the main statute governing debt collectors is actually a federal statute called the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. And that act includes a requirement that any debt collector, when they first contact you, has to send you a validation notice within 5 days that says how much money you owe, the name of the creditor, and what to do if you don't think that it's your debt or that you don't owe it. So if you don't get one of those, I think that would be red flag number one. If you don't think you owe the debt and you get one of these notices, I think your next step would be asking them to provide proof of the debt, such as a bill or an unpaid invoice. If they send that to you and you can look at it and it looks familiar and everything seems in order, probably dealing with a legitimate creditor or collection agency. If it doesn't, maybe a red flag, maybe something that you need to look a little bit closer on. And second thing I would do, once you get past that debt validation stage, is I would take a look at the debt collection company. So I would start just a simple Google review of the name of the agency that contacted you. I would see if there's any complaints online, check the Better Business Bureau. Again, just a Google search can bring up a lot of forums where people have discussed, you may see the same issues or same patterns repeating themselves with this company. Again, take these things with a grain of salt because, you never know. Everybody who's getting contacted by a debt collection agency probably has some complaint about them. So if there's complaints, it's not necessarily determinative, but if you see a pattern of, just really bad conduct, that's a red flag about who you're dealing with. And finally, while you're doing that online research, see if there's any online, any references to lawsuits or judgments against that company. Again, that could be another red flag. If you look at that and there's anything online and you see behavior that's similar to what you're experiencing, that could also give you a sense of who you're dealing with right there. And finally, trust your gut instinct when you're dealing with these folks. If you've dealt with an agency or a creditor in the past and you've always had the same type of experiences and suddenly something's different, that could be an indication that you're not speaking with who you think you're speaking with. As an example, if you've always gotten calls from a live person and suddenly you're getting calls from an automated system, that's a change that, you might want to step back and think, that's really different. I've gotten calls from these people before. It's always been one way. Now it's another way. Maybe I should give them a call and see if this is really them and if they're really trying to contact me right now.
Joe, anything to add to that?
You're muted, Joe. You're still muted.
How about now?
You're good.
You're good.
All right. I think for the most part, also a lot of people do know what they owe and what they don't owe. Another good source you can check is check the big three: the Equifax, the Experian, and the TransUnion. Check your credit report. You don't know that, some people you may have an outstanding debt you don't remember, but as Katie said, trust your gut instinct. If it doesn't sound right, a reputable company will wait until you verify the debt to move forward.
Okay. In some situations, though, the debt is legitimate and the collector is reputable, but their practices are abusive. Can you explain what type of actions would constitute abusive behavior by a debt collector?
Sure. So there's actually some really good case law and just in the FDCPA about what collectors can and cannot do. So some of the biggest rules governing debt collectors: no calls before 8 a.m. or after 9 p.m. Cannot call you at work if you tell them that you're not allowed to receive calls there. And they can't harass you. So I want to put a little extra disclaimer in here that harassment's always kind of a subjective experience. So I would definitely, take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. Talk to an attorney if you think you're being harassed. But this is a very fact-specific area. But as a general rule, it means that debt collectors cannot threaten violence or harm, use obscene or profane language. They can't repeatedly call you, like one call after another just to keep getting your attention. They can't lie to you about the amount of debt you owe or say that they're with the government. And Joe, I think you can elaborate a little bit more on this, but they can't claim that you're going to be arrested or thrown in jail if you don't pay your debts.
No, they cannot. There is no debtor's prison. If you owe money, that's one thing, but they can't put you in prison for owing money. Also, another thing, adding to, you can't say that they're from the government. They also cannot identify themselves as an attorney. So the bottom line is, go with your gut instinct, like we said before. If the reputable company is not going to do any of the things that Katie just mentioned, they're going to work with you to a degree. They want to get their money, and they're not going to violate the law to do it in most cases, hopefully.
Right. And just to add a little bit more about the no debtor's prison concept, sometimes we get reports of these companies threatening to garnish your wages. That is a long, drawn-out process. Long before anybody can garnish your wages, they have to go to court. They have to win a judgment. They have to approve the court has to approve the garnishment. It's not a case of, you're getting your first phone call, we're going to start garnishing your wages tomorrow. There is a lead up to that process. So anytime if somebody's calling you out of the blue and says, we're going to garnish your wages tomorrow, it's not impossible that they got a judgment that you didn't know about. They send it to an old address, something like that. Very unlikely, and something that you should be very concerned about, and you should ask to see the court order authorizing that. If they're really claiming that that's going to happen, because they cannot, no company without involvement of a court and approval of a court can start garnishing your wages. And certainly not without proper notice to you and giving you a chance to be heard. One last point on this, too, I just wanted to bring up is that if you're in bankruptcy and you are getting contacted by a debt collector or any creditor, you need to bring that to your attorney's attention immediately. There's this idea in bankruptcy called the automatic stay. And one of the purposes of bankruptcy is to get these collection activities to stop. So I would definitely recommend that you reach out to your attorney, say, hey, this company is calling me, I'm in bankruptcy, and let your attorney who's handling your bankruptcy take care of that immediately. That's a very important concept of bankruptcy.
Okay. And after that, what can a consumer do if they are contacted by a debt collector that they believe is a bad actor?
So you have a few options here. You can report it at reportfraud.ftc.gov. So the Federal Trade Commission is actually a federal agency that is charged with enforcing the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. They do a lot of work. They keep an eye on all the trends. This is a very big issue for them. So I would definitely let them know about it. You can also contact us. I believe our complaint form is in the comments or in the links to this presentation. If not, you can always email us at consumer.protection@delaware.gov, and we can help you get that form to fill out. But it's really important that we get your complaints. Even if it seems like it's a small amount of money or a little issue, we need a pattern to act most efficiently. I think Joe can add a little bit more about, his process once he gets a complaint in.
It's kind of like if there's a crime on the street, say your car's getting broken into on the street, you don't report that crime. The police will never know that there's cars being broken into a specific area. So we can't send police officers out there to investigate thefts of motor vehicles or something like that. So in the same token, if we don't know that you're being scammed by this company, you may be one person and you're probably saying to yourself, I'm not going to report that because somebody else will report it. In most cases, a lot of people are not going to report this. We don't know what's going on unless you tell us. If you make a complaint to the Consumer Protection Unit with the Delaware Department of Justice, you will fill out a complaint form. You'll send it in. It gets sent to what's called an intake specialist. The intake specialist reviews it, asks some basic questions and follow-up facts. It gets turned over to a chief special investigator, who in turn looks at it, and he or she will move forward in assigning it to an investigator to investigate the case further. That investigator then puts the case together and works with a deputy attorney general, such as Katie, and we move forward investigating your claim. But if you don't report it, we don't know what's going on. We can't help you. No matter how small it is, it could be a $100 loss, but $100 to a lot of people is a lot of money. Or it could be multiple tens of thousands of dollars. We've had those as well. You have to report it no matter how big or small.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, Joe, because I know we've had cases, I've worked on cases where the loss to each individual was only less than $200. But in the course of our investigation, we found hundreds of victims who had each lost $200. So it may not seem like a lot individually, but then from our perspective, we look at it and we're looking at, $20,000, $50,000, that's something that we're interested in going after. But if we don't know about the individual complaints, we're going to kind of miss the bigger picture. So we're absolutely interested in any and all complaints that we want to know what's going on out there. And we really rely on you all to give us that information so that we can keep going after the bad actors in this space. The other thing I just wanted to suggest too for folks would be to contact a private attorney if they're also being, if you feel like you're being harassed by a collection agency or a creditor. If you don't want to hire a private attorney, we have the Delaware Consumer Legal Aid Society. They have an elder law program if you qualify for that. Also, both Classy and the Legal Services Corporation of Delaware, they also offer just general legal services to low-income Delawareans. I would give them a call if you're having this issue, see if they'll take your case. If you don't qualify, I'm sure they can send you to another attorney who may be able to assist. One of the cool features of the FDCPA is there's a possibility of recovering attorney's fees for particularly egregious violations of the act. So it incentivizes attorneys to take some of these cases precisely because they have the opportunity to get paid upon a successful resolution. So just another consideration for how to deal with this stuff.
Great, thank you both. It looks like we have some time for questions. We have a question from a viewer. What does someone do when a debt collector uses spoof technology to mask their phone number when calling debtors?
So spoofing for anyone who doesn't know, spoofing refers to when someone makes a call appear like they're coming from someone else. So it'll come up with a totally different number, maybe a number that's familiar to you, maybe a number of a recognizable company, but not the actual number of who's calling. And it can be a little bit tricky to, even know who's behind it. If you've answered these calls and you know that a debt collection company is spoofing their number intentionally to get you to pick up, absolutely report it to us. This is a known problem that, we here in the CPU are very interested in. Just as a general matter, you can report it to the FTC as well, but we would definitely be interested. Again, it goes to the pattern of, if they're doing it to you, they're probably doing it to other people as well. And if and it sounds like, if you're asking the question, that it's a debt collector who's doing it, and who that debt collector is, we would definitely be interested in that information and taking a look at what's going on, and, whether there's any, violations of the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act or any other state law, or what we can do to help you get that behavior stopped. I agree. That's not the way that debt collectors should be behaving themselves. So we would definitely be interested in taking a look at that.
Okay, and what are some, are debt collectors obligated to give consumers their information, such as their name, their address, their phone number, if a consumer asks them?
Yes. If you are working with a debt collector or someone claiming to be a debt collector who's not giving you that information, that is a red flag. I would be very concerned. I would be especially concerned about giving my information to such a company. Because remember, if you're a legitimate debt collector, you're interested in closing out your files. You want to get paid. You want to get this done. It's in your best interest for folks to be able to contact you, to be able to say, I want to make a payment on this. I want to get this done. So if they're hesitant about either putting a name out or giving you a name to call them, I would be very leery about that. I would go back. I would do some research about this company and see if they're really who they claim to be.
I think I should add a point also. If you are in doubt when a debt collector or a fake debt collector is calling you to collect information, do not give out any personal information of your own. Any more information than they already have, especially your social security number. If they're legitimate, they're already going to have a lot of the information that they're going to need. Don't voluntarily just give it up to them unless you know for a fact that they're a legitimate company trying to collect on a debt that you do owe.
Right. And remember too that, even a little bit of information that seems like an innocent enough question could lead to them getting more information about you that they're going to use to contact you, to do, to figure out your likelihood of paying it, to try to get more and more information about you. So it may seem like, this is just one little question. I don't see how this is going to help them. But remember, there's companies out there that aggregate data. They can find data all over the place and put it together. Any little nugget you give them could really help that company to improve its its client base, its information about you, where you are financially, in ways I probably can't even explain, because it's all algorithms and computers that do it. So just be very mindful about any innocent sounding question that asks for anything, because it's probably, or I shouldn't say probably, but it may be used to just keep building out that information about you to ultimately be used against you in some way.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more question. Where can consumers go to research more information about debt collection, or specifically a debt collector that is contacting them?
I think a good place to start is just a general, like Katie said in the beginning of the program, just to start with a basic Google search. Do company names. Look at the people on the who are listed on a company name. You can find their names on there. Run them by LinkedIn. If you're on LinkedIn, find out if they're legitimate that way. You can even go on Facebook. You can go the Better Business Bureau. You can go to the Federal Trade Commission. Anything on the internet, you can find out basic information. As she alluded to earlier as well, start looking at the comments. If the comments are all positive, that might be a red flag as well, because that could be the company just generating their own positive reviews to make them look legitimate so you trust them further. But the biggest thing is like start on Google. From there, just work your way around social media, LinkedIn, Better Business Bureau, Federal Trade Commission.
Right. And, adding to that point, Joe, don't be afraid to cross-reference the same individuals. If you see in an about section, well, let me back up a little bit. If there's a debt collection company that doesn't name any of its leadership, you may want to go digging and see, are there any leaders who's running this organization and what can I get about that person? Because they may have previous companies that they've been with. And you may be able to learn something just by seeing, oh, they were just at this company that I see the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau just shut down and now they're over here. Could be indicative of, a similar operation being run this time around. Just something to keep an eye out for.
Okay, it looks like we're coming to the end of our time. Thank you everyone for joining us. A special thank you to our presenters, Katie Devanney and Joe Rago from the Department of Justice Consumer Protection Unit. Please tune in for our next segment on prizes, sweepstakes, and lotteries tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.